have to follow Damien, and it's just before lunch. It is not fair, but it's all right. So hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here today. Truth, justice, love. Truth first, then justice equals love. I am a storyteller. Stories are what motivate me. As head of strategic outreach at Pearl Street Films, I work closely with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck to ensure that the stories that we tell reflect what the world actually looks like. But getting Pearl Street to make this kind of commitment took a little bit of time. It took a lot of acknowledging of some really hard truths. Honestly, it took some tears and some cursing. It took us being really, really clear about our commitment to contributing to change in the stories that come out of Hollywood. And I'm proud to say that one of our biggest steps so far is in being co-architects of the inclusion rider, which Frances McDormand referred to on Oscar night. I am a storyteller. In addition to my job at Pearl Street, I've also spent the last 5 years traveling across the country sharing my one-woman show, One Drop of Love. The show challenges audiences to think more critically about their own stories, and especially about how race and class and gender play roles in those stories. Stories are one of the most powerful tools we have for social impact. Stories are not limited to people with money or to those who have benefited from racial or gender hierarchies. They're not limited by language or disability. Everyone can tell a story. But we need to be really, really careful not to limit our stories to our own personal bubbles. Stories without context can be really dangerous. They can lead to stereotypes. And we know that stereotypes lead to things like police brutality, mass incarceration, and even death. And this is why my storytelling mantra is truth, justice, love. Truth first, and then justice equals love. And it is necessary to have all three of these in a story to have a positive social impact. The royal wedding. Now, I know you all saw it. Who woke up like early in the morning or late at night? Come on now, admit it. You did. Okay, you watched it, right? Right, the ideal love story. Prince Harry, who we'd all come to adore as we watched him kind of grow into his mother's footsteps, and Meghan Markle, the underdog, a self-identified mixed-race woman, divorced. So many of us, and I will admit it, including me, were rooting for this love story. And we should definitely celebrate it. But we also need more context. What truths are we missing to give us a bigger picture here? As recently as 1967, it would have been illegal for Meghan and Harry to get married in some US states. And while Meghan may self-identify today as a mixed-race woman, this racial category has never really been an option for her on any legal documents. So in my show, One Drop of Love, I use the ever-changing racial categories on the US Census to give the audience some historical context, some truth. The racial categories on the US Census have changed 24 times since the very first one in 1790. So at that time, Harry would have been counted as a free white male. And what about Meghan? She would have been counted in the only category available to her at the time, which was slave. There's also the very uncomfortable truth that the capital used to pay for the royal wedding was raised by colonialism and enslavement. That is also the truth. And that love story does not exist without that truth. So while we all celebrate the royal wedding, including me, we can also ask ourselves what systems were in place that make it so incredible that in 2018, the Duchess of Sussex has a black mother. By examining the origins of these systems, we can find clues to dismantling them. Truth, then justice. Another really uncomfortable truth that we have not told the full origin story of is the story of whiteness. Anybody know how white people became white? Yes, some black folks are raising their hand. I do. So citizenship status in the US is directly connected to the whiteness origin story. Do you know the story of Ozawa and Thind, the Supreme Court decisions in the 1920s? So in Ozawa's case, the Supreme Court of the United States used science to determine that Ozawa, who had been born in Japan, was definitely not white, and therefore he could not become a citizen. And then, just 3 months later, a man named Thind produced very, very clear evidence that he, having been born in India, was definitely, according to science at that time, white. The Supreme Court decided, no, actually, in this case, remember this is 3 months later, no, in this case, science is not really reliable, and instead the common man knew that Thind was definitely not white. Here, of course, the common man referred to self-proclaimed white people. The Supreme Court never could define what white was, only what it supposedly wasn't, and no one has been able to since. Anybody here want to take a stab at it? No, I don't. In fact, the Irish, Italians, and Greeks in this country became white before our very eyes over the course of many years. So once we acknowledge our truths, we can then work towards reconciling wrongs. This is social impact. This is justice. So what does justice look like in your life and in your story, in your company or organization? What about in your neighborhoods, in your children's schools? So how do we tell our human story? When you tell your story or your company's story, the story of your institution, the story of your data, consider the truths and the history that you might be leaving out. Ask yourself, how does the origin story of race in the United States affect the demographics of our company? How has the origin story of whiteness played a role in the demographics of our leadership? What does our leadership look like and why, given this history? What is the historical context behind the disparities between what women earn at this company versus men for the same job? Consider how the capital was raised that led to the founding of your company. The answers are definitely not going to be comfortable, like in case you didn't guess that. And that is exactly how you know you're doing it right. Be a leader for truth-telling. That is an important step towards positive change and justice for all of us. Because that truth-telling and the pursuit of justice is when and only when we can all finally arrive at some love. Thank you all so much.